What's up, Internet? You're tuned in episode 159 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide, wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Stephen Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, Steve. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Fresh back from North Wales and viewing mountains, and I'm here to talk about salvaging a beloved franchise.
It was funny, right? Because it's like when you're coming back off like a vacation, right? And it was like I immediately hit you, and I was like, "There's about 30 stories we could discuss today. Which one are we gonna do?" It was a big week for news. We could have easily done 5 episodes of this show, I think.
I was away 5 days. You'd think they would calm down. You know, next year when I go away, I need everyone just to pause in the games industry for just a week.
You got to take vacation during like right after like E3 season. You know, you got to find like what are the weeks.
That's usually when Nintendo's like, "Oh, E3's over. Right, here's some more news.
Here's your stuff.
Here you go. It's our time to shine."
Yeah, but like you said, we're talking about Xbox again today. They've been on the docket a lot this year, and you know, it's like I feel like it's the like same song and dance we've been doing for a while here, where it's a tale of two Xboxes. It's like here's this optimistic thing that might be good, and then here's this not so great thing that has ended up being a disappointment. So you know, we'll see if we end up you know, having time to get to all of it today. But we're gonna start things with what's going on with the studio formerly now known as 343. They have rebranded as Halo Studios, and they made a big announcement at the 2024 Halo World Championship where they showed a video that was kind of like teasing the future of Halo. We got this blog post on the Xbox blog that you know, announced the name change and then kind of explained, you know, what the impetus behind that was, what it means for the studio, and kind of its new philosophy and everything. But the big headline is that they are going to be switching over to Unreal Engine 5, which is a pretty big change because they've been using their proprietary engine,
FlipSpace engine,
yeah, for it's like almost 25 years. That's
yeah, since
Bungie's.
I think the beginning, yeah, since Bungie's when Bungie was kind of at the helm. But
yeah,
I mean, I've got mixed feelings on this. I think obviously there are reasons to shift to Unreal Engine 5, and we'll go into those. But man, it is sad to see yet another proprietary engine disappear. You know, we had CG Project Red abandoning theirs. We had all sorts of other games just transitioning over. I'd imagine we've seen EA moving over to Unreal from Frostbite in many of their games.
I gotta say, I remember the last time we talked about this, which I think was CD Projekt Red, right? I remember you kind of lamenting that, and the more I think about it, the more I think that's the future. I think proprietary engines are kind of going the way of the dinosaur. And I think it makes sense. Like when you get into this blog post and they're explaining like why they made this decision, it's hard to argue with it. You know, like it makes a lot
it is
of
for now. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like look at the situation we had with Unity.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden
absolutely
everyone switched over to Unity and is using Unity, and now we're gonna do a runtime fee.
Totally.
So everyone that was kind of on the free bus now has to cough up, and we're going to take a massive slice of your revenue every single time.
This is a problem, you know, just period, right? Like, I mean, think about like Adobe, right? Like them just being like, oh, you owe us an annual subscription fee now if you want to continue using this, you know, program that everyone uses and like you need for your work, right? It's like, yeah, like that's definitely the risk that we run. The more that Unreal becomes de facto, but I just don't see how you don't do that, given the stuff that they're talking about here. So let's get into some of their words for it, so we can debate that element of it once we've heard from the newly christened Halo Studios. So this was a quote from the blog itself that I thought was interesting. They say we're entering a new dawn for Halo. Those new visuals were created using Unreal Engine 5, and we learned that all future Halo projects will use the engine, and that multiple new games are now in development. Alongside the engine change, the studio is seeing changes in culture, workflow, and how its teams are organized to match that new approach. 343 is changing their name to Halo Studio. And then their head, Pierre Hintz, was talking about kind of how they're looking at this change, right? And that it's less of a like clean break, that this isn't necessarily like a new team or anything. It's like them trying to evolve 343 and kind of move into the next chapter of Halo. And he says like chapter 1 is Bungie, chapter 2 is 343, and then now they are, looking at this as kind of that new chapter of them trying to improve the, he says, the efficacy of development and also the recipe of how they make games, right? It's like kind of this fundamental, like, we're trying to rethink what it looks like to make a Halo game, what the timeline is on a Halo game, and, trying to, like, meet with more like modern expectations. They talk about that later on, about like how keeping up with the rate of content that fans expect is something that the old way that they made Halo games just doesn't work anymore, right? That like going away for, 10 years or whatever, right, to work on a Halo game in a vacuum and then releasing it and then already having fans that are hungry for new content is just not sustainable anymore. And that this
Honestly,
change...
I think that could be sustainable, though. You just have to have different games in between, right? We know that Call of Duty wasn't really sustainable in that same model. They basically had to have every single Activision studio working on a Call of Duty game at all times in order to get the annual release schedule. But I don't see why you couldn't have a game running in Unreal Engine 5 that's kind of a continual game, that's a games as a service, similar to Fortnite, where they're able to just pump new content into it every single month, have a battle pass.
I mean, that's the thing, though. What you're talking about is inherently different. Like, that isn't that model. Like, that model is different
in the same way that Warzone's that for Call of Duty. But then I still think there is people hungry for a traditional Halo story where you go away and you come up with a really meaningful story in a really cool environment.
I think that's what they're talking about, though, right? Is that, like, that was the challenge, right? Is that, like, and we'll get into more of the quotes, but it's like you look at Halo Infinite, and it took literally their entire studio, all hands on deck, because not only are you developing the single-player experience and the multiplayer experience, which are essentially two totally different games, right? Like, they use the same assets and everything, but, like, they have totally different content. They have...
Which I think is a failure of studio management and maybe of the publisher as a whole, because we don't look at Forza Motorsport and Forza Horizon and go, well, these are two totally different games. Let's get the same studio to make them. We have Turn 10 making one. And, we have Playground Games making the other. Why don't we do the same thing with Halo Studios? And maybe that is...
I think that's what they're talking about now. Yeah.
And they're going to have multiple studios under that Halo Studios umbrella.
Yeah. Like, it's one of the things they talk about, like, with why. So let's get into the, like, why, right? Because I think this answers a lot of the questions that you're raising, right? They said that, and again, this is, like, exactly what I was driving towards. They said... from the blog post. Previously, 343 Industries needed a large portion of its staff simply to develop and upkeep the engine that its games ran on. Quote, we believe that the consumption habits of gamers have changed, the expectations of how fast their content is available, says Hintz. On Halo Infinite, we were developing a tech stack that was supposed to set us up for the future and games at the same time, right? So, like, that's the challenge, is, like, you're developing the engine, the single-player game, and the multiplayer game, and that's all... one team, and that, like, I think that's kind of like what you're talking about, right? Is that, like, I think that was probably always impossible to do that and actually put out enough content to keep players engaged on the multiplayer side.
I think on the multiplayer side, yes, but I feel like if you do it correctly, there's no reason this can't be done. We've seen this happen over the fence at PlayStation.
I think that's what they're trying to do. I think they're trying to emulate that.
They're using their own engines. We look at Naughty Dog and they're able to pump out high quality games that people love with their own engine.
They're not multiplayer games, though.
they're not multiplayer games, which I think is the big difference here is the multiplayer angle.
Is
and
that
I
you
feel
need
like
to like
could have just been a separate team that was working on multiplayer.
I think their
and,
point is that they couldn't do that before though because of how much of their development power they needed to dedicate towards just maintaining and updating slip space. You know, and like updating the lighting, updating the graphical capabilities, like all those things, right? Like that's, you know, something that they were having to do. This was a quote I really liked. They had a quote from the video that was in the blog post. I don't know if you got to watch that, but they had an interview with the chief operating officer, Elizabeth Van Wyck, and she said, the way we made Halo games before doesn't necessarily work for the way we want to make games for the future. So part of the conversation we had was about how we help the team focus on making games versus making the tools and the engines. And she had another quote where she was basically saying that, like, because of the way their workflow was, they had to focus on being a tech company as well as a game development studio, right? And that, like, that took a lot of resources, right? And a lot of, like, attention from their development team that could have been spent making content for a game. And one of the other things that they talked about was...
I do look at Epic Games, who is a much smaller company than Microsoft, and they're able to be a tech company and a video game developer at the same time, and I do wonder why.
That's not Microsoft though. This is 343, right?
But
like,
I do wonder why Microsoft's not able to achieve that as a company. Xbox as a company isn't able to maintain their own proprietary engine while also making video games.
I think they could, but I think it's a problem of how they've built up their studio stable, right? Because it's like they didn't organically build a stable of studios over time, right? Like they acquired a bunch of studios. So it's like, you know, I think you run the risk of, if you want to do something like that, right? Like of running into what happened with EA. Because it's like, on paper, I think it made a ton of sense that EA was like, well, we own Frostbite. We want to have all of our teams use Frostbite. And then that way, in the same way that Unreal is so useful because everybody uses it, so there's you know, familiarity with the technology, and you can share assets across games and across teams and all that. That's great. But the reality is that Frostbite as an engine was made to make first-person shooters, not third-person, you know, fantasy open world games like Dragon Age. And, you know, we both read Jason's book. We know that the primary struggle with the development of that title was that Frostbite was not a hospitable engine. And there's a reason that they switched back to Unreal. And, you know, I think that that's the thing. If Microsoft wanted to do this, they would need to build an engine and then invest hundreds of millions of dollars into developing it and making it have some level of feature parity with Unreal, right? And then they'd need to force all their studios to move over to it, and probably make a game or two that have growing pains because they're switching over to a new engine. It's just like, it's really expensive to develop and maintain an engine. And to your point, PlayStation's had luck with it, right? With like the Decima engine and, you know, some of those other internal engines that they've got. But yeah, I mean, I kind of think
I'm pretty sure Insomniac use their own engine, right? For Spider-Man.
Is that true?
Or Ratchet and Clank.
I don't remember what they use, because I know.
But I know Naughty Dog's on their own.
Yeah, and Decima's the Horizon one that then Death Stranding got used in that as well. And like those engines are great, right? Like Decima's really beautiful. It creates really high quality graphics, and the animations are really cool, and the lighting is really good. So it's like, I'm not saying that like Unreal is the end all be all and like therefore like everyone should use it, but I understand when they lay it out the way they're laying it out, why it doesn't make sense for them anymore. And I think all of the successful examples that you're bringing up, and maybe there's one that we're just not thinking of, they're not for multiplayer games. They're for single-player games. And I do think that makes a big difference, because if you're making a single-player game in your own proprietary engine, like, there comes a point where it's done, right? Whereas, like, in a multiplayer game, it's like, you need to be making shit once a month, basically, right? And it's like, one of the things they talked about that I thought was really interesting, too.
I mean, Valve's got it, right? Valve's done it with Counter-Strike, CSGO.
Sure.
They've done that many times over. And obviously, Fortnite's built in Unreal, but that's their own engine. And they built that from the ground up.
And that was one of the things they talked about as well, right? Was like, not only were they spending, you know, time and resources like maintaining what is a 25-year-old engine, right? They also said that there are a bunch of like aspects that Unreal has that they wanted to take advantage of that they would then need to spend huge amount of time and money to replicate and add those functionalities to Slipspace rather than just use Unreal. And
you got to imagine that Nanite and Lumen are probably those two.
Those are two of the ones that they called out. Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Because those were the big things that I remember people talking about when we saw the trailers for Infinite. It was like, oh, the lighting just looks terrible. Like this should be like a next gen game. We really should be showing off like ray tracing or global illumination. And we've seen stuff over the fence like Spider-Man that just looks phenomenal, and Ratchet and Clank that looks phenomenal. And we've seen stuff that Unreal Engine 5 is putting out. Why is Xbox still pumping out games that look like this, that look flat, that look like a last gen title?
A 25-year-old engine is their answer, right?
Yeah.
It's an engine that was made to make games on the original Xbox.
Yeah, and Unreal Engine 5 obviously is a extremely old engine, but it's been updated time and time again, and they are really kind of pushing the limits of tech, I think, with Lumen and Nanite.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that they called out, which I think this is kind of the smoking gun for me of like why this like absolutely makes sense, and like why if I was running a game development studio, I probably wouldn't want to have a proprietary engine either. And it's that, and this was from their art director. Oh no, I'm sorry. This is Van Wyck again. Who said it's not just about how long it takes to bring a game to market, but how long it takes for us to update the game, bring new content to players, adapt to what we're seeing our players want. Part of that is in how we build the game, but another part is the recruiting. How long does it take to ramp somebody up to actually be able to create assets that show up in your game? And think about that, right? Like if you're aggressively hiring because you want to make the new Halo game, right? Like if you're using Unreal Engine 5, you could hire 100 people that know how to use it and have them start working right away.
That's what this video felt like to me. It was one of those videos of we're doing this, come work for us videos, because they explicitly said that they were like, yeah, we're building up our teams and we're working on multiple Halo games.
Yeah, they specifically said they're working on multiple projects, and yeah, so it's like I'm sure that's part of it. Also, like they laid a bunch of people off, like and like they probably
that's probably all the tooling people, the people working on the engine. They're now no longer needed, right? Which is a real shame.
Again, honestly, though, it is a shame for those people, and I totally am with you in terms of the risk of a monopoly. And I don't know, just say for the sake of example, right? Let's say that 343, now Halo Studios, had, 200, 300 employees, right? And let's say that like 100 of those were people who were actively, all they did was work on the engine. I mean, if all those people got let go because you don't need them anymore and you can just hire another 100 developers who can just make content and assets and, like that does greatly increase your ability to keep up with player demand, which was the problem with Halo Infinite, right? We all talked about how Halo's back, the multiplayer's so good, everyone's playing it, and then they ran out of content. That was the thing that killed that game's momentum. And I think that if they had been able to produce content at the rate of someone like Epic, like they do with Fortnite, I bet you we'd still be talking about how Halo multiplayer was a big deal.
Epic's insane. Epic, with Fortnite, they can see like a meme one day, the next day that like dance is in Fortnite, and like they can pump that content around so quickly.
You got to imagine that they want that ability too, and that's part of the problem here is that like like they need to be able to more quickly respond to things, right? Like if players are giving feedback about like, oh, we really want like that was the thing where they like, we really want the Forge, we really want zombies, we really want this game mode that we remember from this old Halo game, and it's like, well, it's on the roadmap, but it's like we have like 100 people that can work on this, right? Because it's unsustainable. And I think that like that's, to me, clearly what this is all about, right? Is this restructuring is trying to kind of like get with that program and probably do what you're talking about, where you have one team that's working on story stuff and lore and the world of Halo, and then you have one team that's just in that fucking engine working on new game modes, working on new content, working on skins, working on season pass material and like stuff that's going to keep the game alive and keep people playing, month to month, year to year, and not, oh, I did everything in season 1 and then there wasn't another season and I started playing something else.
Yeah, which I think is a problem with any game. You really have to kind of get that stronghold and keep people's interest, which I don't understand why this engine has made it so restrictive, right? Because we've seen even with Bungie and Destiny, they've been able to do that. And obviously there's a legacy there with Halo, with Bungie. I can imagine probably part of the problem is they have to update the entire game whenever they add some new content. Like, we've got a new character pack, we've got to update the entire game, everyone's got to download it all again, and they've got to go through that process. That's not the case with something like Fortnite, where they can kind of load content in over the cloud and they can just kind of do a Delta update to quickly patch in some content.
I wonder too if the difference between that and something like Destiny is also that like Destiny is a more focused experience, right? Because like with what we're talking about with Halo, right? It's like in an ideal world, right? Like the cadence of Halo is you make numbered Halo game, right? That has a story and a campaign that takes 20 to 30 hours to beat and expands the lore and yada yada, and then while that happens, a multiplayer game comes out, or if you go to the Warzone model,
give me another Halo Wars,
whatever.
You
do something like that where it's an always online game or whatever. But then in that world, right, you're working on that single player game, simultaneously supporting the multiplayer game with content updates every month. Then when that game comes out, right, the story game, you have to support that game, and then you need to start development on the next one. Right, like that's how it has to be, and
there's DLC,
either way, right?
That up as well.
And I feel like that's different than Destiny, right? Where Destiny is like, it's the same thing essentially, where it's like, like we're coming up with a new story expansion, and then that's going to feed into the multiplayer side of the game, and yada yada. But it's like, that is different than making a new game from the ground up and being like, what's Master Chief going to do this time? And like, what's the emotional beat of that story? And how does that translate to new gameplay experiences? And like, are we going to invent a new race of aliens? Or are we going to fight the Covenant for the 10th time? And if we're doing that, why does that make, there's a lot of work of pre-production and stuff that I think when you're making a brand new boxed game that needs to advance graphically and this and that, there's not that same expectation for the next thing that comes out in Destiny 2. Not to say that that's less work. It's just different. It's a different amount of resources. It's a different scale of work. It's a different timeline of work. And I think that I could see why that's easier to do than it is for a franchise like Halo, right? Which is something that like, has the potential to have multiple games come out, a console generation. Whereas like Destiny 2 is going to be the only Destiny game we get, right?
I don't know why it's not been renamed Destiny, honestly, at this point. I don't think we're ever getting a Destiny 3 at this point.
I think it would be too confusing, right? Like,
I mean, add the Destiny 1 content to Destiny 2, call the thing Destiny, and be done with it. Like, it's just insane that it's still called Destiny 2.
I think that makes sense.
Like, just do it. Like, why have you not done that? I think you're right. I mean, this is hopefully going to speed up development. It's obviously done so that they can get more talent through the door quickly and not have to train them on their own proprietary engine. Everyone in the industry knows Unreal Engine. Why not switch to something if you're going to work on new titles that don't have to deal with any of that legacy stuff anymore?
Particularly if you want to bring in people who have like worked on other successful live service games and like use their
you've worked on Call of Duty Warzone. Come on over,
right?
Engine,
help us develop that.
Help us out.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, makes sense, right? Or like I don't know, like get somebody from Fortnite and have a battle royale and whatever, right? Like maybe you're kind of past that. Maybe it's too late, but even so, it's like that is something that would have been a big deal, right? Like if they were like, oh, like, we have a roadmap for Halo Online, right? Like whatever that's called. And, we have like season 1 content, and then we anticipate that at the end of season 1, people will be kind of hungry for something new. Here's a battle royale mode, right? Now that's a new thing for you to talk about for 6 months or a year or whatever while that gets steam or doesn't. And then, hey, we brought back Forge. Hey, we brought back zombies. Hey, we brought back whatever, right? Whatever other thing you're waiting for. And I think that's got to be where they move if they want to keep Halo relevant and not have it just be this like retro boomer shooter I guess it's not a boomer shooter. That's like Doom, where it's a millennial shooter.
It's getting to it though. It's like getting to
We're
that,
just old now. That's what it is. But that's the thing is like, do they want to make an old-fashioned game that comes out once every like 10 years or whatever, and it is a hit for the fans it's a hit for, or do they want to bring new people into Halo? Because I think
do you want to be a Zoomer shooter?
There are not young people that like Halo like that, you know, and not that Halo. I don't think that that's a fault of Halo. I don't think that Halo is not interesting or not fun or any of those things. But I think it's never.
I kind of do think that though. I don't think Halo Infinite was that interesting or that fun. Honestly, I don't think the story was that inspiring.
That's true. I think the multiplayer was really fun though. I think if that
it was for a while, but then
they ran out of content.
The rest of it, you're like, okay, cool, I've done all these maps now.
That's my point though, right? It's like it wasn't that the loop was bad; is that there wasn't enough content to support the loop.
Yeah,
and that's a different problem. That is a way different problem than this is not fun anymore, right? Because like I'll give you that Halo Infinite story wasn't special, right, or particularly memorable, but I had a lot of fun playing it. I had a lot of fun playing through the campaign, just because I like to play Halo. The gameplay of Halo is fun, you know. And I think
and I liked his new little grapple hook. That was fun.
Yeah, that was really cool.
That was
like
great.
I really enjoyed that, right? Like getting swing in and smack with a sword, and like it was really neat. It was it had good ideas, and I think that the excitement around that multiplayer was palpable at the time, you know, and like I know I was wrapped up in it, and I like you said, I lost interest in it because there wasn't new stuff to do, and like I hit a point where I'm like,
you'd be sat around waiting for one of the big maps to show up, and it would take forever for you to load in on those,
right,
because you'd constantly, they only had like 2 or 3 of them, and you'd always get funneled into a different game. And then when you did get put in one of those games, it would like glitch out half the time and you get booted off. Like it just wasn't a great experience. And I think they could have done something to fix it, but I kind of feel like it feels like this is the right thing for them to do. Just cut your losses. We're so far removed now from Halo Infinite that it's just like, okay, cool, that didn't work. It wasn't as good as it could have been. It wasn't everything we wanted it to be. But let's make sure that the next generation of Halo is what we want it to be and can be as good as it can be. And I think this does set them up in the right stead for that. I hope that the projects that they've got in development, I hope one of them is a traditional single-player game. I hope one of them is a game as a service online multiplayer that they can just continue to add to forever, and we get new content kind of in perpetuity. And then I hope there's some new experiences, something that with Halo that we've not thought about, you know, similar to like
Halo Wars back in the day.
Lego Horizon Adventures would exist, you know, but why not do something in that space with Halo? Why not do something new and fresh that we've really not thought about?
Yeah, and I think that's what Halo needs more than anything. Because like what I really liked about this is they had a quote from their art director, and I don't see his first name here, but his last name is Matthews. I apologize. Chris Matthews, thank you. And he said the spirit of Halo is more than just the visuals. It's the lore, it's the physics. Playing as Chief, you're this huge tank of a soldier. It's the way that he moves, he feels. We're all really obsessed about what our players love about Halo, and we're constantly listening to that feedback. And I think that's the thing, right? Like, to me, Halo is very similar to, like, Mario or, like, Tony Hawk or, like, any of those kind of, like, franchises where it's, like, what the gameplay is the movement. It is all about how it feels to get around and like the weight of a melee attack, the gravity of the jump, like those kinds of things. If they can replicate those things in Unreal, then I think they're set.
Similar to Mario, but I do think it can be refined in the same way that we just saw that refined in last year's 2D Mario game. I forget the name of it.
Wonder.
Mario Wonder. In Mario Wonder, it changed a little bit.
Yeah. And I think Halo does need that. It needs to be evolved.
Yeah, it needs to feel fresh again, but still have roots in Halo. And I think the visuals that they've shown in both the video and on the blog post, they feel like a Halo game. They've got that fresh, clean, you know, perfect look that I feel like we always see from a Halo game. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's one of those you know it when you see it kind of things. It's a very distinctive look, and I feel like they've pulled it off in Unreal Engine 5 using tech like nanite. You can see that those surroundings of the mountainous ranges and the trees and things like that are using tech like nanite and lumen to kind of build it all together in Unreal Engine 5. If this looks
anywhere near like what we can expect from the next few Halo games, I'm really excited about it because I do think this is a step in the right direction. It's just whether they can keep that pace. I don't think the problem necessarily was the visuals. I think people can forgive poor visuals if the content's there, if the story's there, if the gameplay's there. And I think if Unreal Engine 5 helps them get to that point, then yeah, this is 100% the right move for them.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that to me makes sense. And I'm not surprised to see studios like them and CD Projekt and BioWare and like a lot of these studios like revert to Unreal because a lot of them worked on using Unreal before they used a proprietary engine. And again, I think it's just like, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a studio that is very technology forward, but I think that there are a lot of studios that are not technology forward. And I think having to have the pressure of like maintaining and using a proprietary engine, I think probably does put an undue amount of stress on developers, and that it's something that maybe was easier to do at a time when games took less time to develop. But now that video games are taking 6, 7, 10 years to develop, I don't see how they can continue to do what they do that way. And like, I think you look at like, and we're going to talk about it in a second here, but like something like Starfield, and it's like, you have to wonder if that game would have been more successful if they weren't using, what's the Creation engine? I forget what they're
Creation. But I mean, they did update Creation, but do you think...
Yeah, but again, they updated it. How many years did they spend updating it on the 10-year development cycle of Starfield?
Yeah.
And if it was 1 year, that's 1 year that could have been spent polishing the game and putting more content in it and addressing some of the things that people ultimately didn't like about it, and like...
Or is it a year that it takes people who are very, very familiar with the Creation engine and they've built...
To switch over.
Built Skyrim and they've built Fallout 4 and 76 in it, and now they've got to switch over to something new and they've got to figure out how everything works.
Maybe
because Creation Engine is incredible at remembering millions of positions of individual objects throughout a world and keeping that persistence in place. We saw those videos when Starfield came out of people just like dumping 3,000 like sandwiches into a small room and just the physics just flowing them out. Is that something that's possible with Unreal Engine 5? Or is that something that even matters? Do you people care about individual sandwiches and being able to put them down in a specific space and coming back to it later when they're playing an RPG? Is that relevant to you? Or do you
Is it worth it? Is that trade-off worth it? Yeah.
Well, or do you accept the fact that maybe someone moved that sandwich? I could probably live with that.
I also have to wonder if something like that isn't possible if you partner with them, right? Because that was the thing they talked about in the video and the blog post, is that like, as part of this switchover, they like communicated with Epic and were like, we're thinking about doing this. These are the things that we're, and they worked with them to figure out if it would be something that made sense for them, right? And then they worked on this Project Foundry, which we haven't even really discussed what it was, right? The video was made using this, demo, whatever you want to call it. They said they were clarified that it's not a new game and it's not a standard tech demo. And they said, quote, it isn't just an exploration of what's possible with this engine. It's a true reflection of what would be required for a new Halo game using Unreal and training a tool for how to get there. Foundry has been made with the same rigor, process, and fidelity as a shipped game would be. And they talked about how everything that they built was made to the standard as if it were going to get shipped, not a vertical slice, tech demo kind of thing. And I wonder if something like that wouldn't make sense for someone like Bethesda, right? Like, could you not just partner with Unreal and be like, hey, like worth considering switching over to your engine, and we make these huge high profile games. What a win for you that would be. Like, can you work with us to get the functionality that we need? Right? Like,
is that not something that doesn't come from Bethesda? It comes from Phil Spencer, and he says, right, we are trying to switch as an organization to Unreal Engine 5. Please give me the reasons as to why you think that's not feasible as an organization. Like Bethesda, tell me your grievances with that engine. If you have any real technical concerns, maybe they make considerations for those. And then they present those to Tim Sweeney at Epic, and they say, right, Tim, here's all the problems that we've got at Microsoft.
If you can nail these down, we'll become a huge business partner.
Your biggest custer.
Right.
We will be your biggest customer if you move.
We got 30 studios that'll switch over to Unreal, right? Like,
yeah.
You wonder. I don't know. But I guess to put a pin on this, we did have some comments in the Discord of people being like, new name, same studio. Like, what does this actually mean? And
also, the logo's awful. It looks like a train with like the face is that thing, that Homer has that's pressing the key in that episode of The Simpsons.
Drinky Bird.
It looks like the Drinky Bird face that's like on the front of the train. It's so awful. I don't know
why they didn't just use the Halo. Right?
I don't know either, unless that's the new logo for Halo games. It's terrible. I don't understand it. Yeah. And 343, what a cool name for like if you're a fan and you know what 343 is, it's like that's such a cool name for a studio. I get that Halo Studios makes more sense. You're making Halo
I think 343
games.
has a stink on it at this point too. Like they've made so many Halo games, and I think like that their legacy is that they're the team that took over for Bungie and then kind of drove this series into the dirt.
Which I can understand, but then it's we still know it's you.
Yeah.
You're not
people forget
get away from it.
People forget.
Yeah.
Right? Like sometimes, you do the name change and it's like there's a new culture and it's the old people, but it's new people and it's now it's a new thing and it's like, all right, like you buy in, right? If it proves itself. Otherwise it'll just be it's 343. It's another 343 game. Nothing's changed, right? And that's going to be on them to prove, and that was something that the one thing I'll say that I did find promising was that was something that they specifically said in the blog post was that like we wanted to make this announcement like at the big Halo event and everything because we felt that Foundry had reached a place where it was ready to share, and that's the attitude that we're going to take. Like we want to spend less time talking about what we're doing and more time working on what we're doing and, get across the finish line with something that speaks for itself. So, I think if you're feeling skeptical, I don't blame you. But yeah, I think that these are good changes. Whether or not they end up, netting out better Halo games remains to be seen. But
I don't think we're going to find out till 2030 as to whether it makes a better Halo game or not. I feel like that's probably the timeline for the next one. Might be a couple of years sooner than that. If 2028 is the target for the next gen console, maybe they try and get something out for that. But
yeah.
Look at the disaster that happened when they tried to get Halo Infinite out for launch. My Xbox Series Xbox has Halo Infinite on it, and it didn't show up for at least a year later. And then after that, we had to wait again for kind of the second part of Halo Infinite, And I don't think they want to replicate that. I feel like they'll just show us when they're pretty ready and confident at this point. And I feel like they are pretty confident with what they've shown with Forge. I think it looks great.
Yeah, I think what we saw looks good, and I do think that it sounds like their head's in the right place, right? That like there's a real effort here to right the ship after just kind of like doing the same thing for 3 games. Mm-hmm. 3, right? 4, 5. Yeah, I think that's right. 4, 5, and Infinite. Yeah, and kind of just being like, we'll get them next time, And it's like, all right, I think Infinite was the closest they've gotten, and it was still kind of off the mark. So the idea that like, let's really try to like reevaluate the way that we're doing this and how we're spending our time and where our resources are going is, I think, the right call. Because Halo, I think, if it's executed well, I think it is still one of the most valuable IP that they own because it has so much potential, and that there's no reason it can't, stand shoulder to shoulder with something like Call of Duty again. But the quality just hasn't been there, or the content hasn't been there, even when the quality was. And hopefully this is enough.
The good news is that their parent company owns Call of Duty now, so they can plan the release cycle around them. You can do Halo 1 year, Call of Duty the next year. If they're sensible, that's what they'll do and keep people hungry for both of them.
Yeah, try to find a way for them to, peacefully coexist. There's a lot less competition in that space these days than there used to be too, right? It's like Battlefield fell off. Like, it's not like there's a lot of shooters, but like there's not a ton of first-person shooters like there used to be. So the idea that they could, stake their claim as like the other one, right, and not being like, it's not a military shooter, it's space and it's different. Like that. I think that there is space for that if they can, excuse my pun, if they can do it right.
We shall see.
We shall see. So I want to talk about another Xbox studio and what's their future in a second here. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of October. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Voodoo Vic, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/FlipScreenGames. Y'all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go check out our sister shows, Nintendo Noise and the Steam Deck podcast, you can go get them wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy this show, you'll enjoy those too. That's the FlipScreen Games seal of approval. Yeah, that's what we're calling it now. Go check that out. FlipScreen.games, that's the website. However you want to get involved, go over there and click on some stuff. Helps us out quite a bit. And unless you want to go above and beyond on Patreon, it won't cost you a pretty penny. So, while Halo Studios is trying to right the ship, right? They've got an eye towards the future. Bethesda is still grappling with the kind of disappointment of Starfield, I think. And, we had their big DLC push, right? Shattered Space, which I think a lot of people went into with an expectation that it would be, a Phantom Liberty moment like Cyberpunk had, or, like something like that, where it's, not just DLC, but also kind of like a 2.0, right? A coming out party for, the game launched in a okay state last year. Here it is, and it's, more focused. It smoothed out some of the issues, whatever. And it's just not lived up to those expectations, right? As of recording, it is sitting at 61 on Metacritic, making it among their worst received releases ever. I believe the only thing underneath it is Fallout 76.
It's pretty bad on Steam as well, mostly negative out of 2,488 reviews.
Yeah, and a lot of kind of complaints about boring quest design, lack of value for the cost, those kinds of things. And
you talk about value for cost. I mean, come on. This is from the company that charged you like $10 for horse armor. So I feel like this is at least marginally better value than that.
Yeah, I mean, talking about value of a video game is so hard because it's like, what does that mean? Like, is it hours played? Is it how much you enjoyed the experience? That value is going to be a different thing for everybody. And what some people look at as value, other people look at as bloat, So it's tough to zero in on
it is tough.
What the right answer is for that.
I look at it in terms of value versus what the base game was. Like the base game, $60, cool. I'm paying half that for this DLC. This DLC is $30. I expect something in the region of it's about half the size of that.
Yeah, right. And I think, to bring up past examples, I think people were expecting something like Far Harbor with Fallout, right? Where it's
or Shivering Isles back on Oblivion,
which is this is going to be a 0.5. This is going to be a big chunk, big expansion. And it just doesn't seem like people feel like it lived up to that mark.
Man, they should have just made this free. They really should have just made it free. It should have just been really sorry that some people had really bad experiences with the game. Here's the free DLC. And if it was free, I don't think anyone would have cared. They'd have just been like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Extra content that's now included. Instead, I may go and play this because I didn't buy the game. I got it on Game Pass. And if I brought the premium edition, it would have come with it anyway. I don't know. Maybe I'll go check it out. But it seems like the reviews just aren't there. It seems like it's maybe around 10 hours.
It diminished my enthusiasm for it quite a bit because you and I think both enjoyed Starfield more than the average person, right, when it came out. And I never ended up finishing it, but I always planned on getting back to it, and doing a New Game Plus run and everything. And when this was announced, I was like, oh great! When that comes out, it'll give me an opportunity to jump back on and feel like I'm compelled to check it out because there's new stuff again. And it's like, oh okay, that's a bummer. I'll probably try to get back to it again at some point because I did like it and I'd like to explore more of what it has to offer, but
I mean, that seems to be the consensus on the reviews that I've read, that it's not good, it's not bad, it's more Starfield. And if you like Starfield, you'll get
Then you'll
that.
probably
I think
like
some
it.
people, yeah, and I think some people had expectations that this was going to be the Phantom Liberty moment, that this was going to be the, okay, well, we've looked at the base game and we fixed a bunch of things, and here you go, here's that kind of 0.5 release or 2.0 release, and kind of have at it. But that's not what it is. It is a standalone piece with like standalone quests and things like that. So I think I probably would enjoy it. I'll
Yeah.
probably check out at some point, but I'm not like champing at the bit
That's
to go, oh,
where
yeah,
I'm at.
more Starfield.
I'm not like, oh, like this completely, takes it off the board for me, but it is like, well, like I am like, I'm like, so
you got Dragon Age coming out in like 2 weeks. Like,
exactly. And like Life is Strange is coming out like 2 days before that. So it's like, I don't know, like, do I really like, is this the time for me to jump back in? No, probably not. And if it had come out and everyone was like 9 out of 10, I would have been like, all right, shit, like, let me get into it. Like, I got 2 weeks, let me play it. But now I'm just kind of like, when I get to it, right? If I get to it. And that's a shame, because I think they, we're probably hoping for more than that. And the game's director, Emil Peligu, Jesus, sorry, Emil. Pagliarulo. That's it. There we go. Sorry. That's like, sounds pretty Italian. You'd think I would do that better.
Yeah, it does. I was thinking that, but with a name like Emil, I don't think it is Italian.
Emil Pagliarulo. Yeah. Anyway, he had a interview with Games Radar where he posted it and was like, this was a really fun interview, and there was a bunch of quotes in it where he was kind of like, like talking about how the DLC was like this big success and they were really proud of it and everything. And he got a response from a fan who was kind of like, hey man, like, I feel like this interview is kind of downplaying like a lot of really common player concerns about Starfield, and it feels like you're kind of like hand waving the criticism away while you pat yourself on the back for a job well done. And I think you could understand why that would like rub some of us the wrong way, right, when we were expecting more from this. And he I thought gave a thoughtful response to the questions or the comments from that fan, and I thought they were worth pulling in, because I think that some of what we're talking about, like I guess those expectations, are kind of explained by like some of what we were talking about earlier, even like some of these engine challenges and everything. So I'll read his thoughts and then you can respond. He said, "Hi, Steven." First of all, I appreciate you taking the time to passionately share your thoughts. I may not agree with everything you wrote, but I understand and appreciate where you're coming from. Twitter has never been a great place for polite discourse, but I'd like to address what I can. I don't like leaving fans hanging. In fact, I generally say more than I should. We have a community team for a reason, but I think a bridge to devs is important. First, the interview. As the design director, sometimes I'm asked or instructed to do interviews. I was happy to do that, to represent the designers and the studio. Seeing how hard and how passionately they worked on Shattered Space, they deserve nothing less. Optimism and excitement are pretty standard for interviews, and I'm generally pretty optimistic and excitable about games by nature. That said, my optimism is in no way meant to be mud in the eye of any dissatisfied fan. That's not how it works. I'm also very proud of Shattered Space. We all are. Most of the quests and levels were done by designers who have worked on previous Bethesda games and DLCs, going all the way back to Morrowind. They're good at what they do, and it shows. If folks haven't played Shattered Space and they like Starfield, I think they're missing out. If folks have played Shattered Space and still don't like it, that makes me sad. Honestly. Just know that we've also been hearing from plenty of people who love it. Maybe it's a game of expectations. Fans want a lot, and we do all we can to accommodate them. Here's what I can tell you. Nobody, and I mean nobody at Bethesda, is patting themselves on the back while ignoring our players. In addition to Shattered Space, we've also spent a lot of time this year addressing community concerns and making fixes. We'll continue to do so, and we'll be listening to our fans every step of the way. We make these games for all of you. Starfield is a massive game, and it takes time for us to address things. We move as fast as we can, as safely as we can. Game development is always tricky, but with a game as big as Starfield, every fix could potentially break something else. To close, let me just say, I love games. I love Bethesda's games. I've been playing them since the Terminator days. All I or anyone else here wants to do is make those games and then make them better. No ego, no arrogance, just a lot of hard work and appreciation of our fans. Which I thought was
You know what?
a thoughtful
I
response.
think they should all be patting themselves on the back. They fucking shipped a massive game and a DLC that follows it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with giving an interview and being proud of your team for getting a game out. Getting a game out on its own is a hard fucking task. How many games get cancelled? How many games don't make it across the finish line? This is one of the biggest games that we've seen in recent times, and a DLC to follow it up.
It was also the culmination of a decade's worth of work, which is insane.
A decade's worth
Can you
of
imagine
work,
working on something for 10 years?
Exactly, and their first new IP. It's like, man, this is like a huge thing for them. Like, they should take a moment and pat themselves on the back. And for someone to kind of diminish that, I don't think is fair. I think it's fine to communicate and say, look, this maybe has missed the mark. Things people were expecting X, Y, and Z. This is only the first DLC. They do have other DLCs planned. Like, this isn't it.
Development on Starfield is not over, right?
No, development's not over. They have a couple more on the roadmap. I also kind of feel like, man, come on, if you're still this passionate about hitting people up on Twitter, the games director, and just like, kind of antagonizing them a little bit, just move on to a different game. Like, if this wasn't for you and you didn't enjoy it, you didn't get a good feel out of it, then just move on to something else. Like, it's a shame, but not every game needs to be for you.
Yeah, and I think that's where this stuff gets tricky, because like I think Emil's response was really good, and I don't think that I don't even think that the initial like comments were like super aggressive, like they weren't like nasty, but I think you're right that they do come off as like a little bit like, I hesitate to use the word entitled, but I think that is something that happens a lot with video games, and I think it is multifaceted, right? Like, I think there is that element of like, anytime that a piece of art that you're really highly anticipating comes out and it doesn't meet your expectations, right? Like, you're going to be disappointed. And I think that for some people, particularly if you're like a really, really like big fandom person, right? Where like being into something is like a large part of your identity or whatever. Yeah, I could see how that leads to you then lashing out, right? Because then it's like, all the attention that I gave this, all the time that I spent caring about this was for nothing, right? Or whatever, right? That's the narrative that you then, the self-fulfilling prophecy that you've created for yourself, right? It's like, if this isn't the next coming of Jesus, I'm going to be upset, and it's your fault. You wasted my time. You don't care about how I feel. And I think it's just, like Emil said, that's not what it is. It's never that simple. And I think when you're just the observer, like when you're just the audience, it's very easy to only think about things from the perspective of the audience, right? And not that you spent 10 years and, missed birthdays and all this shit to make this happen, and then it wasn't what everybody, it's like, that's really hard. And I do think that like we would do better to meet those people with empathy rather than disdain, because I'm sure that they're also disappointed that you were disappointed, right?
Yeah, exactly. I can't imagine waking up the day after I've put this DLC out and I'm seeing, lackluster reviews on Metacritic. I'm seeing kind of it being review bombed on Steam, and it's mostly negative. That's got to be really demotivating for the whole team's morale, and they've just got to pick themselves up and kind of carry on and push forwards and try and make the game as best as it can be with the future DLC and for future games that they work on. But I can't imagine anyone there is massively excited. But to take a moment to pat yourself on the back during an interview with, an industry website, I don't think is any bad thing. Like,
no, what was he supposed to say? It's like,
exactly. And I think people need to remember that, there's probably a PR person on the line. We've had interviews on our podcast where there's a PR person sat on the line, ready to jump in case he says something that he's not meant to.
Hey!
So he...
Whoa, okay. Can we cut that out?
so,
Sure, no problem.
Like, they're very crafted, and I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah, it's like this is his job. It's his job to go out and do this interview, and it's like he's not going to go and be like, well, didn't meet expectations. It's like, and it's like also to the point, right? That's the other thing that I find very frustrating about like capital G gamers and the way that they get about this kind of stuff is like, I think a lot of gamers get really locked into this idea that if something's not for me, it's for nobody. Because I'm the perfect Bethesda fan, and I love all their other games. So if I don't like this, it must be because it's shit. And the reality is that like a lot of people like Starfield, right? Like the kind of overall conversation, right, landed in mixed response. But mixed is not bad. 70% of people liking it is not bad. Right, like that's
better than average. 5 out of 10. It's like that's above average.
Right, exactly, and it I think does come down to expectations, and that it was expected to be something more because of who they are, right, and that they worked on it for 10 years, and it's a new IP. Clearly, it's going to be a big deal, and your mileage may vary, right? Like, but that's like something I think we need to just be okay with. Like you said, like not every game is for you. And, like, you've got to be able to just swallow that. I think where that gets tough is, like, if you are somebody, right, where it's like, because, to be completely transparent with you, I'm worried about this in a couple of weeks, right, with Dragon Age. And, like, I'm increasingly less worried about it because I've seen...
that footage looked good, Pete. Come on.
And the previews. There's been previews from people that are, like, diehard Dragon Age people who are like, it's good. And I'm like, great, that's enough for me. But point being, right... This is a game that I've been waiting for since 2014, right? When the last one came out. And I finished that and was like, oh my God, when's the next one? And
we don't have Dragon Age for you, but have you thought about, this Mass Effect game that no one also liked, or this game where you fly around in suits in an engine that shouldn't have been built in? Are you happy with that one too?
Right. So that, and again, right? Like if I'm a Bethesda person, right? If I'm like a diehard Bethesda fan and I'm like, the last good Bethesda game was Fallout 4, or if I was one of the people that was divided on that, Skyrim, right? It's like, yeah, like you're going to feel burned. And like, you're not wrong to be disappointed. You are wrong to make that disappointment someone else's problem, I think, right? Like expressing healthy criticism, talking to people about it online, those things are all fine. I think as soon as you're like ascribing malicious intent to responses in an interview, it's like you're too invested, right? Like you're too deep in this right now. And I don't even think that like Steven is like a jerk or it's like whatever, but it's just you're fine, yeah. But you know what I mean? Like as someone that gets very emotionally invested in these things, there is such a thing as being too invested. And
yeah, exactly, yeah.
And I think though, to defend those people, right? When you wait for something for 10 years and you've had it hyped up for 5 years, right? Then it's like, well, yeah, like you promised me that it was going to be special, and it wasn't.
Just wait for Elder Scrolls 6. Just park on this one. Elder Scrolls 6, 2030, you'll be okay. All right, that's fine.
Yeah,
just
right, exactly. Wait another 6 years, and then maybe you'll like the next game they put out.
You know what?
Yikes.
You might like the next Halo game. That could come 2028. Who knows? And it's in Unreal Engine 5, so it might look good. Also, there's rumors of that like Oblivion remake that's been going around for like centuries at this point. That could be good. We don't know. May not also be true.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I guess this is just one of those things where it's like, I understand the disappointment that folks have had with the game. And I think that, the best thing you can do is just kind of like, leave it alone. It's just like, if it wasn't for you, you got to just cut your losses and move on. Find the next game that's for you, right? Like you have to, accept that like the studios that you love, the creatives that you love, like they're going to let you down sometimes. And like, they're going to put out something that doesn't meet your expectations. And that's just that.
Yeah. Well, I can only hope that people that like Starfield, like Shattered Space, I'm probably going to check it out at some point, but like you, Pete, I'm not.
kind of like, ugh, need to download that right away. It's more like I'll wait and see. There's other stuff coming out.
I'm kind of like, I'm waiting for a sale, right? Like, because I also played it on Game Pass, so I would have to like either resubscribe to Game Pass or buy it.
We'll buy the game again.
And I don't want to buy it at full price a year later to play DLC that got lukewarm reception.
Just go buy a copy at GameStop.
Yeah,
Disc up for like $10 and then just get the DLC.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm thinking is like I might do that over like break or something, and I'll probably try to get to it, but it's just like I don't know. There's like 3 or 4 other games coming out this year that I'm really excited for that I'm like that's where my energy is going to go, right? Not to play DLC for like my 5th favorite game from last year, something like that. It's like it's not where they want to be, and I it's a disappointment for sure, and I honestly feel more disappointed for them than I do for myself. It's just like, man, that's a shame. You got to imagine that they thought the response was going to be better.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you can tell that from Emil's response that's the team thought it was going to be more highly received than it was.
Yeah. But if you guys are playing the game, let us know. I would love to hear from one of you folks. And like if you think it's, knowing how much Steve and I enjoyed the base game, is it worth prioritizing as we move into the end of the year here? But I can't imagine people are going to be talking about this one too much by the end of the year. It's like the DLC I think we're going to be talking about is Elden Ring, right? And it's going to be like, oh yeah, that came out. Oh well.
Yeah, I know. I kind of feel like the Elden Ring one might be the one that's considered for Game of the Year this year in the same way that Cyberpunk's was last year. We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, Diablo got its expansion too, right? So that's another good one.
Yeah. Okay. I love Diablo, but even I don't care all that much.
You got so burned by that game. We'll see. All right, folks. Well, remember, FlipScreen.games, that's a website. Write in with your thoughts. Let us know what you thought about the future of Halo discussion, what you think about the future of Bethesda. Where does Xbox go from here with these extremely valuable teams and IP that they just seem to not know how to manage, Hopefully this is the turning point, but we've said that every year for 8 years, so we'll see. But I'd love to hear from you folks, so make sure you write in all the ways that you can. Check out those sister shows, Nintendo Noise and the Steam Deck podcast. Join the Discord. Keep the conversation rolling. However you choose to get involved or show your support, we thank you for joining us on another episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.